Well, hello, everyone. My name is Alexis Rogers, and I'm the Customer Relationship Lead here at RightCapital. I hope you're having a wonderful Wednesday so far. I want to thank you so much for joining us for our overview of the Planning Modules webinar. In this webinar, we will be highlighting the core functionality behind each module and how they can be used to facilitate smoother conversations with your clients and provide the visual backdrops you need for well thought out discussions. We will be covering some key insights that can be found for each of the modules and how you can really fine tune your narrative when you are using RightCapital and approve upon, of course, and build out your proposals that will enhance your clients' plans. So what we're going to be reviewing today, we're going to be talking about each of those different modules and the key insights we can find within each individual module, and also some of the very powerful visualizations that can be found when looking at each of the different modules that can be leveraged to enhance your conversations with clients. We're also going to be talking about some common tips and tricks when we are looking at the modules and how they can really be best suited for certain conversations with each of your clients. And of course, as always with RightCapital, there is a plethora of different resources that you can leverage while using our system. One of those being that you can ask questions during this webinar. So feel free to navigate to the questions menu drop down and put your questions there, and I'm happy to address anything towards the end of the presentation. And so shifting gears into RightCapital, and the first thing that we're going to be addressing today is going to be, of course, when we first open up a client plan, our dashboard snapshot section. Today, we're going to be looking at the Baratheon family plan. And a lot of times, a snapshot in particular is a very, very powerful space that's going to be pulling all of the different information that can be found throughout RightCapital and putting it into one space for you to easily navigate your conversations with clients, while also highlighting very efficiently all of those key pain points you might be addressing in a client meeting, or just having a little bit more of an easy to digest space for clients. In this snapshot, this is completely customizable in terms of what you include or exclude within this visualization. There's going to be a couple things that are already pre-populated here. For example, if we didn't want this historical net worth to be here, you do have the option to delete one of these widgets by just clicking on the X mark and hitting the delete button, and we can start to fine tune what we're seeing here. You can also drag and drop and reorder the flow of what you want to address within the snapshot feature as well. You also will be able to leverage some of these text boxes to have another open line of communication for clients. This is often leveraged to either have a take-home piece for the client, an interactive piece for the client, or just to have that agenda that you might be addressing with a client. So you can fully customize what's included here. As you can see, I also included a nice Calendly link, so that way they can book time directly. You can also retitle this as well to make it a little bit clearer as to what this is referring to. So if I don't want this to be called notes, I can actually say that this is our agenda for our meeting, for example, and hit save. And it's just a nice way to have a space to check in with the client. We can also add additional items. So if we wanted to pull additional powerful visualizations, we can scroll through this list of the plethora of options and start to bring in some of those nice key conversation pieces. You'll also notice when hovering over each of the different modules and the different widgets here, you will see an arrow icon populate. When we click on the arrow icon, this is going to bring us to the module in which we are pulling this information from. So that snapshot feature can be a great space to talk about that high level information and smoothly transition over to a deeper discussion on things like our current year savings for our proposed plans, for example. And you can use that arrow icon to smoothly transition and have a little bit more of an efficient conversation with clients. This will allow you to quickly navigate around the system and find the information you need directly from within the snapshot feature. So it's going to be a very powerful space that you can really get fine-tuned to be covering exactly what you want it to be covering. Next up in our conversation of the different modules of RightCapital, still within the dashboard section, is our balance sheet. Here under balance sheet, This is where we are going to be, of course, seeing the overview of the client's assets, liabilities, and net worth. We can also open up the details, both in the action items down here and also in these sub-tab over here to see additional insights as to the specific accounts, who owns what, and the total for those assets and liabilities, and of course for our total net worth. So a lot of great information can be found here if we're trying to check in to see exactly what is happening with the current balance sheet for the client. We can also view under the historical net worth for a client. So especially if we've had a long-standing relationship with a client in RightCapital especially, this is going to be a great space to just check in to see how much our assets have grown over time, how much our net worth has grown over time. We can also view what's happened with our liabilities and our investments. And we can toggle from these different drop downs to really focus the conversation on a specific time frame. So if I wanted to look at just the last 6 months, I can make this a little bit more of a focused conversation from here. Next up is going to be our liquidity tab. This liquidity tab is going to be a space that can allow you to view a client's current liquid assets, as well as a space to set what you want to define as a liquidity target based on their current monthly expenses to help make sure that they're covered in the event of an unforeseen financial hardship. In the action items is where you can set an additional proposed expense buffer. So it's going to be incorporating, of course, what their current monthly expenses look like, but you do have the option to set an additional buffer just to have a little bit more leeway in terms of what you want to define as their target liquidity. You can also use a slider to set what you want as your target for how many months we want to be looking at for a liquidity target. And then we can hit refresh and see how that will impact our liquidity analysis. You can take it a step further and navigate to the details tab to see some key insights as to what the current liquidity is defined as for each of the different accounts, and also what is making up our current monthly expenses. Another thing that you can also do is to further customize how you want to define a liquid asset. So we can click on the edit button down here, and this will open up a drawer in which we can start to add or remove what we want to be considered a liquid asset. So that can either be bank accounts, cash and taxable investment accounts, or life insurance cash value. Once we have that covered, next up is going to be our budget module. Here in the budget module, this is one of our powerful tools that allows for clients to monitor their spending by bringing in transactional information from accounts that are linked in the profile net worth. Once those accounts are linked, that will unlock the budgeting module and will allow for you and your clients to have a space to set what you want as the budget and also to track spending, and also for an advisor's perspective to see what the client's habits might be and where they might be heavily spending their money on. In the summary tab, this is where we can see how much of our budget has currently been spent for the current month, how much we have remaining. We can see what each of the different budget categories and where we are a little bit overweight and where we still have room to spend. You can also click into the activity tab to see a little bit more insight in terms of our activity over time for each of the different categories of expenses, income, and other categories. And just to see some of that behavior, this can also be looking at different time periods. So we can, of course, continue to focus on the current month, but you can also increase the time frame that we are looking at from this drop down. You can also view prior activity by category and just change this visualization depending on what you like to see for that conversation. Our final sub-tab is going to be our budget categories. So this is where we can set what our budget looks like. This is where you define what that current budget looks like for each of the budget categories, how much we want to be spending in each of them and setting that budget. You'll see directly to the right is our average monthly spend. You do have the option to change the time frame for what you're looking at for that average monthly spend, of course, but that's just a good space to kind of set what we want for that standard. And in our transactions tab, this is where we can start to recategorize some of those transactions and start to dial in our budget further. You can also customize exactly where they are. We can recategorize them if needed. You can redefine the descriptions and make those modifications. You will notice that there is a blue download icon that is available throughout some of the different modules of RightCapital. Whenever we see that blue download icon, this is an indicator that we can download this in an Excel spreadsheet. So especially for the budget module and some of our cash flow reporting, this is going to be a great option for if you wanted to see a different sort of report and have some different calculations that you're running as well. Furthering our discussion on client spending is our debt module. This debt module is a great way to show the value of eliminating debt in the financial plan using some specific debt reduction strategies. And also, if we devoted additional budget towards paying down our debts, how would that impact our debt pay down strategy? You'll see that when you make your proposals, you'll see exactly how much we will be saving if we pursued that proposed debt pay down strategy and how much sooner we would be debt free. This would be defined via the action items. This is where you can start to apply different payment priorities, such as the debt snowball or debt avalanching payment strategies, highest to lowest interest rate, lowest to highest balance, and also the ability to propose additional monthly payments going towards paying down our debts. You can also fully customize what you want to be included in this particular debt pay down module. That can be done by clicking on the edit button. Here's where you can start to add or remove loans. So for example, if we have a loan that we have a set schedule, or maybe for some of these are actually student loans, so we want to be taking a different approach with them. So we're actually going to be excluding them. You can fully customize what is included here just to have a little bit more of a focused conversation on the exact needs of the client. That's how you can exclude those from this particular module, but you also have the option for each one that is still included to apply different strategies. So right now we're using the proposed payment strategies for all of our debts, but from this drop down, you do have the option to still have this particular debt in the module and be something that is impacting the visualizations and the calculations here, but is keeping the current payment strategy that we have based off of the profile net worth entries. This is also commonly utilized to model refinancing loans as well. So if we are actually refinancing this mortgage, we can select refinance from the strategy drop down, enter the cost of closing the refinance, the term, and the rate. And that's how we can define what our debt proposal is. Once we cover that key visualization found in the debt module, if we go to the payment tab, this is where we can see a little bit more insights as to what the current situation looks like for the debts, including their balances, their interest rates, the minimum payment, what the current payment is, and then what our proposed next payment looks like for each of the debts. We can also navigate to the details tab to see what our proposed payment strategies amortization schedule looks like on an annual or a monthly basis, and for each of the different loan types. Once again, you'll see that download button, a key indicator that we can download in an Excel spreadsheet. Now that we talked about paying off our debts, next up is going to be our student loan conversation. So as we know, student loans have some unique aspects about them that we need to consider. So this is going to be our other powerful tool that focuses on student loans and the nuances surrounding the student loan paydown strategies that are applicable, ranging from public service loan forgiveness or any of the income-driven repayment plans or even consolidation options. Here is the summary tab where we're going to see some nice visualizations in terms of what the total payments compare from our current strategy versus proposed. When we make our proposal, you'll see exactly how much would be saving, how much of our loan balance would be forgiven, and if there's any interest benefit. We can start to define what our student loan strategy would be by once again navigating to our action items. This is where we can state what the borrower's time frame was when they first borrowed the loans, if it's before or after any of these key dates. We can also indicate if they are already working towards public service loan forgiveness. If that is true, we would just check off this box that says working towards PSLF, otherwise called public service loan forgiveness. And then we can use this slider or enter a number into this field to indicate how many months a client has already worked in the public sector to earn public service loan forgiveness. We can also model different tax filing statuses, especially if we're looking at certain income-driven repayment plans. If they're married filing jointly or married filing separately, that can have an impact to those student loan calculations. And this is going to be a space where you can ensure that you are accurately capturing this key information. Once we've set up what the path looks like, we can then start to build out our proposal within these two other fields. We can indicate here what the planned career is. So if they actually already have plans to work for the private sector and foregoing public service loan forgiveness, we can indicate that here. Otherwise, if she's going to be taking advantage of PSLF, we'd want to indicate that she's continuing and planning on continuing to work towards the public service loan forgiveness. From there, we can indicate what proposed payment plan we want to be on, if we want to follow the standard payment or any of the income-driven repayment plan options, or refinancing these loans. Under our Loans tab, this is going to be a key space, especially if you're trying to build out proposals, and especially as there are so many nuances to each individual type of student loan that is out there. This loans page is going to be very helpful to see what the loans are eligible for based on what this entered back in profile net worth. So it is an important factor to consider that everything that we're looking at here for student loans is feeding directly from what we entered back in profile net worth within that student loan. So it's important to ensure that we're indicating accurate information from there in order to have accurate student loan calculations. Once we have all that entered in profile net worth, though, this is where we can see what they are eligible for in terms of public service loan forgiveness, income-driven repayment plans, and if they can refinance. Our strategy tab is going to be a very helpful space to see and have that conversation to visualize what the different paths look like for student loan payments. This is going to be where we can have that check-in conversation to say if we work for the public service organization, we can look at this option of public service loan forgiveness, and whichever path we propose that they go on, we will see highlighted in the green color. So if I just save and hit refresh, we'll see what our proposed payment strategy looks like here. Under details is where we can once again see a little bit of that schedule of what it looks like for our payments for annual versus monthly and for each of the different loans. Next up under our dashboard module is our tasks module. Task is a great way to engage with clients directly within RightCapital if you've chosen to invite them in that way. And it's also a great space to create some efficient workflows for yourself and for clients. Back in your advisor portal, you're going to have noticed another tasks module that's dedicated for your management as an advisor for all of your tasks that you're applying across the board. This particular one that we're looking in right now is specific to only this client. So when we start to add tasks or modify tasks, this is only going to be relevant for this one client since they're in specific client plan. From here, we can kind of check in to see what tasks are overdue, what are due this week, what's upcoming, and what's already been completed. So especially as we have that beginning of the year conversations, if we wanted to review all of our progress since we've been using RightCapital together, we can kind of have that check-in conversation to show exactly everything we've completed via this particular section. You do have the option to change the format, so we can actually use the table view if we want to. If we prefer this as our aesthetic for talking about tasks, we can show this table view, and you can kind of designate that specific space for completed tasks once again from that drop down. But otherwise, you would also have that board view, whichever works best for you and your client. You have either option. And as you can see, you can efficiently toggle between the two and switch back and forth. You can also add tasks directly here. So you can add a single task When we add a task, you can assign that due date. If this is going to be a recurring task, and then if this should be assigned to yourself or to the client or co-client. And then you can mark that priority, whether it's high priority task, low priority, or none. And then whether or not this is visible to the client. So if this is going to be an internal task for you, you just want to mark this as not visible to the client. Otherwise, we can keep it visible to the client and add that task. If you have task templates built out, you can also apply them directly here to this client as well. Next up is our investment module. And as the name entails, the investment module is focusing on the client's investment picture. The first thing that we're going to be greeted with when we open up the investment module is going to be our asset allocation module. This is another great space. This is going to be a space where we can visualize the comparison of where the client's current portfolio is versus a target model portfolio. The current allocation on the left is going to be where we can see what their current split looks like, their 64-36 split, what their annual return currently is. We can see what's making up each of the different asset classes from here versus our target allocation, which is that 60-40 split. From this drop down on the right-hand side, this is where you can also change what you want for your target allocation. So you can have a little bit of a different conversation. If we're trying to rebalance the portfolio, we can also see some additional insights in the action items in terms of how much more we need to invest dollar-wise in order to reach that target allocation. On the left-hand side of the screen under current allocation, this is where we can start to customize what we're considering for our current allocation. So we can isolate specific accounts, or we can create a customized group to really isolate those accounts and create that kind of different look if we're trying to talk about rebalancing these particular set of accounts into this model portfolio. You can kind of customize what you're talking about here and the narrative that you're sharing. The details tab will just be another insight into that same conversation of the comparison between our current allocation versus that model portfolio. Next up is our allocation path. Here under allocation path, this is going to be a visualization of the client's shifting allocation over time. So especially as we know, clients' goals can shift as they get older and as time goes on, and oftentimes their allocation will shift alongside those goals. This is where we can see what that looks like. You can see that starting allocation and also that retirement allocation. It's important to note that this is going to be impacted by what you chose as your allocation method. Back in the gear icon settings methodology tab, right now I have pre and post retirement allocation, which is an immediate shift into a different allocation upon retirement, but you also have other options for a change in allocation over time from there as well. Next up, and continuing the conversation on our investments, is going to be the sector and style module. This is going to be where we would see another visualization, but this is going to be looking at specifically which equity sectors the client is invested in and if they are overweight in any particular category. This is going to be fed over from the ticker symbols and the information that is entered back in the profile net worth for their investments. So we can see here that comparison. In the action items, this is going to say exactly what we're overweight in. We can also see that equity style as well. Continuing that conversation, in the concentration tab, this is where we can see an illustration of how concentrated a client's portfolio is, and it can be a space to further the discussion on needing to diversify the portfolio. So we can see here what we're invested too much in, the Amazon ticker symbol, and you can also define what you want for your concentration threshold via this slider as well, and we'll see those adjustments to their portfolio. Under tax allocation, this is going to be where we can take a deeper dive into the tax exposure of the client's accounts and can assist in the conversation on if we need to make an adjustment to the tax allocation. So we can see here how much we have in the different tax buckets, but we can also click into any of the sections of the pie chart to see additional insights as to what is making up the taxable bucket. So it's a great space to check in. It is also important to note that you're going to see notes throughout the different modules of RightCapital. If we click on the notes option, this is going to bring up a field in which we can drop notes to either have a streamlined communication with the client or even notes just for yourself as an advisor. So we can actually add a note. We can leave a note saying, let's discuss Roth conversions. And we can have this be shared with the client and hit save. Then we will see that when we click into that module. At the bottom of the action items, the clients can see this if they log in and have access to this. And if we downloaded a PDF report of this particular page, we would also see it displayed there. So it's just a nice way to have that kind of note that you can leave to a client to make it a little bit more personal or to paint a little bit of color in terms of what you're referring to when including this for them. You can also add an internal note. So if you wanted to leave this just for yourself, you can mark this as not shared with the client. We can say we reviewed this on February 21st, 2024. So just a way for yourself to keep track of, and that will not be accessible by the client, either within the login page if they're invited to RightCapital or when we download a report. Next up is our holdings section. Once again, this information is feeding directly from the profile net worth and all those ticker symbols that are entered there. This is where we're going to see those details as to how much a client has to each of the different holdings, for which account, and the quantity and any cost basis as relevant. Once again, this can be downloaded into an Excel file for ease of use. Next up is going to be our retirement module. Here under the retirement module, this is where we're going to see a couple of the different gauges of financial well-being. The first one we're going to be greeted with is under the analysis tab. Here under retirement analysis, this is where we're going to see the probability of success. This is going to be looking at the Monte Carlo simulations, which are 1,000 trials of market volatility. And the probability of success is the percentage of those trials that make it to the end of plan without running out of money. So as we can see, the current path that they're on has a 95% probability of success. But there are a lot of different shifting goals and priorities that a client might have and different life paths that they can make. This analysis section and in the action items is where you can start to define what that particular proposed plan might look like. We can propose changes by clicking into the field here. We can see what it looks like if they retire earlier. And we can also utilize this slider to toggle to the age that we want as well. You can make those adjustments to each of the different action items that are populated here. We would hit the refresh button, and we can show those impacts to their probability of success if they follow that particular path. We can also navigate to the bottom here and click on the edit button once again. This edit button is going to open up a drawer in which we can start to include or exclude certain action items that are already in the background, like of course their planning horizon is still considered, but you can exclude that if it's not something you're proposing a change to, or we can include additional items here. So these things are still part of their current plan. It's just whether or not we want to propose changes to it. As you can see, when we start to add more, it's a little bit more to be looking at when we're looking at the action item. So we can start to fine tune that and really focus on what is relevant for the particular client's conversation. That's how you can kind of customize what's included in the action items. The current plan has all of those already baked into it. We can also click on the edit button again and propose a new path. So if we are going to be straying from what the current plan looks like and just going on an entirely new route, we can click on add new items to start to add additional action items. So we can propose new goals, new income, new savings, new expenses. We can also propose insurance policies and also annuity purchases as well. And that's how you can incorporate new action items to start to build out your proposals. If you wanted to create more than one proposal, you can do so by clicking on the pencil icon next to the current plan. This will open up a space, a drawer, in which you can either add a new plan and essentially copy the current plan, or you can copy your proposed plan or one of your other proposed plans and build from there. So you can create multiple proposals as needed, especially as we know that a lot of clients might have different paths they can take. You can definitely designate and create those custom paths as needed from here. Once we've done so, now we can discuss our confidence tab. So our probability and confidence tabs are both looking at those Monte Carlo simulations, that probability of success and the 1,000 trials of market volatility. And the confidence tab is just going to be a visualization of where those trials end up and what is happening for those ranges of trials in terms of their asset values. So this is a space to kind of continue that conversation or just to see the insights as to what is happening in those trials. But our remaining 3 tabs, comparisons, savings, and retirement details, these are going to be pulling from our secondary gauge of financial well-being, which is the cash flow projections, which is a straight line projection, which means that there's no volatility factored in, and it's a guaranteed return for the baseline projection. Here under comparisons, this is where we're going to see a very powerful comparison chart. We're going to see number 1, our invested asset comparison between our proposed plan that we have selected and our current plan that we've got selected. But from this drop down, we can actually toggle to compare the differences of their net worth, their taxes paid, and their assets at retirement. So extremely helpful for those taxes paid, especially if we're talking about Roth conversions. Going to be a great space to have that conversation. We can also click into the savings tab to check in to see our current year savings, see what we're saving into for each of the different types of accounts, what our savings rate looks like. We can also view our savings over time from this drop down, our savings rates until we retire, of course, and our total savings and returns as well. And under retirement details, this is where we can focus on the retirement picture. We can see here their income stability ratio, how much of their income is considered stable. If they've got an income shortage, we can see these income sources over time. We can also view from this drop down the withdrawal rates of their proposed plan and also retirement spending. It's going to be a large number because this is their total retirement spending, but it can also be an eye-opener when we're talking about things like long-term care or health care in general, and those hefty costs at the end of life. Next up, and kind of continuing that conversation on the probability of success, is going to be our stress test module. Here in stress tests, this is where we can apply various stressors to a client's plan and view how their probability of success reacts. So we're going to see here a couple different charts in terms of probability of success for those different stressors. We have our baseline considered, of course, and we can view what the different probability of success looks like for each of the different stress tests. We can define our stress tests by going to the action items, and we can toggle these sliders to see what it would look like if Social Security was reduced by 100%, assuming that they don't get it at all. We can show what it looks like if they live for a longer period of time, what it looks like if healthcare costs are higher. We can hit the refresh button, and we can show how that might be impacting their probability of success for each of those different stress tests. So we can kind of toggle over each of them. Even if they had no Social Security, it still is a fairly good probability of success. You can also toggle between different plans as well. So especially if you're trying to talk about your proposal and how that might be still safe, even if we have no Social Security, you want to make sure you're toggling here to whatever proposal you want to look at, or even isolating the current plan's stress test as well to show how that might be reacting to some of these stressors if they maintain their current path. So it's a great space for a lot of different conversations. You will see at the very end a combined stress test. That is going to be combining all of the worst possible things happening. It's going to be combining all of these and assuming that they happen at the same time. You can also click on the edit button down here to include or exclude certain stress tests. So if we didn't want to include our combined stress test, we can hit the exclude button and hit save, and we'll no longer see it on our stress test. Next up is our Social Security tool. This is going to be our optimal Social Security strategy calculator. This is going to be looking at which filing age would provide the clients the most in terms of Social Security dollars. This is going to be considering their retirement benefits and spousal benefits. It's a very comprehensive strategy look through. We can view here under comparisons just some key insights as to what it looks like between their optimal strategy versus their current strategy. But in the action items, this is where we can see exactly which filing age provides the most in Social Security dollar benefits for each client and co-client. For them, it is age 70, and we can see this comparison here in terms of how much more they'd be receiving if they pursued that strategy. But if we click on the annual cash flow comparison dropdown, we can select the cumulative cash flow comparison option, and this will be where we can see what our break-even point is between the two compared filing strategies that we've got selected. So for them, they need to live past age 80 to hit that break-even point for the optimal strategy. And under summary, this is just going to be the total amounts clients would receive for each of the main filing ages. It is important to note that for this strategy and some of the other ones that we have been talking about already and will be continuing to talk about, if we navigate back to retirement analysis for just a second and go into the action items, you will see on the right-hand side some strategies that you can apply. This is where you can start to incorporate some of those module strategies, such as the Social Security optimal strategy. You can also incorporate the debt strategy that we curated and student loans as well. Next up is our Medicare module. This is going to be a fantastic educational resource to enhance clients' understandings of Medicare and to also just clear up some mysticism surrounding Medicare for clients especially. This module targets key consideration of each Medicare coverage options. You can kind of define what your typical habits are. This is purely client facing. Under coverage, we can start to see what would be covered from the different Medicare options that we have selected. And under enrollment and tips, we're just going to see some nice resources and some tips for when we are looking at Medicare filing. In the action items, this is where you can define what the proposed Medicare choices are. And that will be directly feeding into here in terms of the conversation that we'd be having for that Medicare coverage piece. The action items will also host some additional resources in terms of the Social Security website and also the Medicare government website as well. So it's going to be a great space for clients. This is a standalone module and it's purely an educational resource for clients. Next up is our cash flows module. Here under the cash flows module, once again, this is that secondary gauge of financial well-being. It's that straight line projection, which is that guaranteed return each year. The first tab we're going to see is our MAPS sub-tab. Here under MAPS, this is going to be isolating a specific year of their cash flow, and it's going to be an easy to digest visualization of that specific year for the clients, especially. Within our waterfall option, we would see here in the green what the income inflows looks like for the year we've got toggled, and then where that money is going towards. What are we spending it on for living expenses or housing costs? And then what is our total net cash flow? You can toggle via the slider to whichever year you want to isolate. So if we wanted to look at that key life event, which is Gendry's retirement, we can isolate that specific year to see exactly what's happening with our income inflows and where that's going towards. From the waterfall dropdown though, you can see a different visualization of this information via the breakdown chart. Here is where we can see, once again, that total inflows and our total outflows. And you will be able to click into each of these different options to see additional insights in terms of exactly what is making up the living expenses and our housing costs. It's really important to note when we're talking about cash flows, though, that you can select which cash flows you want to look at for different plans. So right now we're looking at the current plan's cash flows. You can isolate other proposed plans that you might have as well. So it's important to toggle between those depending on what you want to see for those key insights. Under the Summary tab, this is going to be where we see the total inflows and outflows for the client for each year and across their lifetime. This is going to be another area where we can see very valuable information in terms of how their life is turning out to be, and also how the numbers are coming out. So for example, this is a great space to check in to see and what is defining our expenses. For example, we can click on the living expense header, and each of these headers we can click into to see additional insights as to what is making up this particular figure. So as we're looking at expenses, and we saw our total expenses were $131,000. If we wanted to know what is making up our expenses, we can click on this header to see exactly what is contributing towards this figure. And this is true across their whole lifetime. We can see eventually their Medicare kicking in later on in life. So some really valuable information can be seen here in terms of what their cash flows looks like in the future. Under net worth, this is going to be a year-by-year breakdown of their net worth over time. Invested assets is going to be focusing on their invested assets, the contributions going towards those assets, distributions, and returns. And under accounts is going to be where we see the year-by-year breakdown of the account values. Right now, we're looking at the ending balance by accounts over time, but from this dropdown, you can also view the additions to accounts, required minimum distributions, withdrawals from accounts, and also net cash flow as well. And under options, this is only going to be accessible if you have stock plans entered back in profile net worth, but this is where you can see some insights in terms of what is happening from a cash flow perspective from any options that might be vested over time. And under insurance module, this is where we're going to see a companion piece to our retirement analysis, which specifically runs a scenario for life insurance of a client or co-client passing away 1 year from today. This will be calculating a protection need, which is the amount a surviving client would need in terms of an insurance death benefit in order to make it to the end of their plan without running out of money. As we know, though, when somebody passes away, a lot of variables in their lives would be changing. If that's the case, that is when the action items come into play. And this is where you can start to define what might be changing for a client and proposing those changes here to show if somebody passes away, what their college goal might be looking like in terms of their children, if we're going to be changing some of those different costs for them. If we click on the edit button, this is where we can once again start to include or exclude certain action items for us to propose changes to. So if we are going to be having a difference in their retirement age, maybe we're not going to be retiring as soon as somebody passes away, you can include that from here and start to build that in to their life insurance need calculation by proposing changes here. In the Summary tab, this is where we see that visualization of their protection need and also any proposed or current insurance coverage. But under each client or co-clients tab, this is where we can see the income sources if somebody passes away, the income shortage dollar amount, and we can also view the impact to invested assets if somebody passes away as well. And under details, this is where we can show that cash flow summary of what it looks like if somebody, one of the clients or co-clients, passes away. We can change from this drop down which client we're looking at. We can also view the impacts to those accounts, so similar to that accounts tab, ending out account balances and those additions to accounts. And you can also click into here to see additional information as to what is making up each of those figures as well. Next up for insurance conversations is going to be our disability insurance module. This is where we can see how much a client's income is currently covered and also view an analysis of how much insurance they can get to cover their income. Under the action items, this is where we can see, if somebody becomes disabled tomorrow, you can kind of define what you would see for your proposed monthly coverage and those proposed insurance parameters to show how that would impact their income coverage. You can also, once again, click into each client and co-client tab to see additional insights in terms of, for disability insurance, of course, how much income is covered per year, essentially, and also the impact to invested assets if somebody becomes disabled tomorrow. And the details is once again going to be a space to see those cash flow specific details for their yearly inflows and outflows, and also the ending account balances as well. Our long-term care module is going to be continuing that conversation, but it's going to be a deeper discussion on the true impacts of long-term care events and providing a further explanation on how long-term care insurance can assist in protecting a client's assets and their livelihood. We're going to see through a visualization here in terms of 3 different bar items. The first one is going to be isolating what happens to clients' assets without a long-term care expense. The second one is going to be considering a client's assets with a long-term care event happening. And then finally would be our impacts of a long-term care event, except we have the long-term care insurance that we are proposing incorporated down here from these action items. So it's going to be a great space to show that comparison of what it looks like if we have long-term care insurance, but also that conversation of how long-term care can impact your plan as well. And under coverage, this is going to be that summarization of our total long-term care cost and how much is currently covered versus proposed in terms of coverage. And under property and casualty, this is where we can view how much of a client's tangible assets are covered. And once again, leveraging the action items, this is where we can fine-tune our coverage goals in terms of homeowners insurance target, our auto insurance plan, and if we want to propose additional umbrella insurance as well. And under our education tab, this is where we can address that key concern for many clients, which is ensuring that their children's or grandchildren's education is funded. Leveraging this module, we can view how much of each client's education costs are currently funded and fine-tune how much the clients are planning on participating in the education funding. So you can see here that visualization for each child or grandchild. Looking at SONS education costs, we can see how much of the goal is currently covered. We can view that total cost and also isolate the cost per year. And in the action items is where we can start to define what their college goal looks like in terms of cost. If we plan on her taking out any scholarships or loans, we can also change the 529 asset allocation from here as well. And also isolate our funding sources. So if we wanted to actually isolate the 529 only, we can make those changes and hit the refresh button and see how much their 529 will be funding the education goal. Further down is where we can start to propose additional 529 savings. We can use these sliders to illustrate a lump sum saving, so a one-time saving contribution to the 529. And we can also propose an additional annual 529 savings contribution from here as well. And you can also check in to see what the current balance looks like for the 529s. Once we've kind of curated our proposal, in the details tab is where we can show what the education cost summary looks like for each child. We can show that funding. We can also look at the 529 summary as well to show that return, the savings contributions, and those withdrawals happening later on as well. Next up is one of our other powerful modules, which is our tax module. Here under tax estimate, this is a space that we can use to leverage to have a smoother and well-informed conversation on a client's tax situation. We're going to be greeted here with some different tax rate charts, starting with the effective tax rate. We can view the federal income tax brackets and federal capital gains tax brackets as well. We can view that for each of the different client plans, ranging from the current plan to any of our proposals. And under details, this is where we can see mock-ups of the 1040. So if we wanted to see what is going on with their tax calculations, this is a great space to do so. And we can also look at each of the different years across their future projections. We can also view, on top of the 1040, the various schedules, AMTs, and taxable Social Security form as well. And under distributions, this is going to be a great space for us to talk about that tax picture for the client, but also isolating what might be the best tax efficient distribution strategy for them. And also if we wanted to look at analyzing some Roth conversions as well. Here we're going to be greeted with the chart referring to their ordinary income tax bracket and what their current path looks like. We'll also see how much more they would have if they followed our proposal in terms of tax adjusted ending wealth. But in the action items is where we can define our proposal. So we can kind of play around here with what we want to see for a tax efficient withdrawal sequence, meaning which bucket would we be pulling from in the event of a negative net flow. So if we don't have enough income inflows to cover our outflows, this is the order in which we draw from their assets to fund those outflows. Under step 2, this is where we can define what we want to see for Roth conversions. So we can illustrate filling up the tax bracket via Roth conversions. So if we have the conversation and they're comfortable filling up the tax bracket to the 24-28% and paying those additional taxes, we can toggle the slider to show those impacts. Once we make that proposal, if we navigate to comparisons, we're going to see some very powerful comparison visualizations in terms of the tax adjusted ending wealth from our proposed strategy versus the no Roth conversion strategy, how much we'll have tax-free. From this dropdown, we can also view the impact and comparison between withdrawals from accounts, account balances, RMDs, and also federal taxes paid. Details is going to be highlighting the dollar amount we'd be converting each year on that first column, what's happening with the accounts. We can also view the tax details and the impacts to Medicare premiums as well. Finally, under our estate module, this is going to be a space where we can talk about that end of life. So especially as we're talking about putting things in a tax-free, and if we're talking about what's going to heirs, we can continue that conversation here in the estate module. First up is our checklist section. This is going to be a categorical space where we can kind of look at and check off what important estate documents have already been completed. We can enter the details here. So if you've already got that will drafted, we can indicate who the executor of the will is, the guardian, when the will was last updated. And in the action items, once again, it's also a nice space to leave notes. So if you wanted some additional insights, maybe an explanation for what any of these might be for a client, you can also have that streamlined communication from here as well. Under our beneficiary tab, once again, this is a categorical space. So you can indicate for each of the different accounts that they currently have, who we'd want for a primary or contingent beneficiary, or you can even enter a custom person as well. Under analysis, this is where we're going to be showing the flow chart of who is inheriting what, how much of our estate is going to be paid in taxes and fees. We can click onto each of these to show additional insights in terms of what is making up our taxes and fees, the estate, or anything we're showing here. In the action items is where you can start to play around with what is happening in terms of when we pass away, what's happening with probate expenses. But under the edit button, this is where we can start to include additional action items or even propose trust strategies. So we can click on add new trusts to start to add any of these plethora of trusts into their plan. Once we've added our trust, if we wanted to curate a trust strategy, that is when the comparisons charts become relevant. We'd show here the difference in dollar amount that would be going towards their heirs, how much more would be going to charity, and how much less they'd be paying in taxes and fees. And under the details tab, this is going to be a key chart in terms of just detailing out what we'd be showing in the flow chart, just on a line-by-line format. And under trust, this is where we'd be showing what is happening with the trust over time, if we have that included in the plan. Next up, under the 3 dots in the upper right-hand corner, we're going to be greeted with our stock plans module. This is where we can isolate what is happening with our stock plans and any current equity compensation that we might be doing. We're going to show here a visualization of their current equity compensation path, how much of their stock plan has already been vested or unvested, Under the equity compensation dropdown, we can also isolate when we would be vesting all of our shares by. And under our action items, this is where we can start to propose a stock plan strategy. We can start to illustrate different exercise strategies, liquidation strategies, and even isolate specific grants as well. So if we wanted to have different grant strategies, we can click the yes button and start to isolate those different strategies on the individual grant level. Under the edit button, this is where we can start to include additional key strategies that might be applicable for certain stock plans, like cashless exercise and 83B election. The grants tab is going to be continuing that discussion on our current equity plans that we have for our stock plans in terms of how much we have of each of those different grants, how much is vested versus not vested. It can also be broken down by dollar value as well. The analysis and details tab is going to be highlighting our proposal. So we can show here under analysis the difference in our invested assets if we followed our proposed stock plan strategy. We can view the comparison in the difference between our taxes paid, the stock plan percentage of the portfolio, and the stock plan cash flows as well. Details is just going to be a little bit more of a similar cash flow projection look in terms of the summary by shares, what's happening with them over time, summary by value, our cash flows as well, and the taxation. We can also isolate specific stock plans. So if you've got multiple, we can isolate what each of those look like over time. Next up is going to be our calculator. This is the human life value calculator and is another way to gauge and run a life insurance calculation. This is going to be focusing on income replacement. Here is where we can show and change the action items to define what the annual income is for the clients and co-clients, how close they're to retirement, their discount rate, and what we want to assume as a tax rate. Our report section, this is where you can curate your reports and customize what is included in each of those PDF reports. So once you have that conversation and you know exactly what you want to highlight, you can start to include or exclude certain modules. You can even click on some of these underlined ones to start to fine tune even further the narrative you're sharing within the report. So if we wanted to isolate just specific subtabs of the analysis module like we did earlier, you can really start to fine tune it here. We can also toggle the select plans options to include multiple plans. So especially as I have 4 plans, if I wanted to include all of those probability successes and action items, I can do so by clicking them here and hitting done. Then I can just download those into a PDF report. Finally, under our notes tab, this is going to be a great space to manage and view all of the notes that we were kind of referencing throughout the different modules of RightCapital. Here's where you can see what all of the notes are across the different modules. You can also customize them from here as well and delete them from here. Under advisor notes, this is where you can leave key insights for yourself. Clients will not have access to this. This is purely internal facing. You can leave notes in terms of your last meeting, what you discussed, those key insights to their behavior, and also maybe those key life events that you might not want to be leaving as just a general note. And then finally, under our vault, under the folder icon in the upper right-hand corner, this is where you can start to have those shared secure documents with the client. You can upload specific files here to share with the client, or even create folders as well. You can click into each of the current ones to view exactly what is in each of the folders, or view a preview of what the file looks like. You will notice that you also have a private folder though. The private folder is a space for you as an advisor to have documents just for yourself. This is going to be private to you. The client would also have their own unique private folder, but you will share a shared folder space. But this private folder is just for your resources and in case you needed to store reports that you might have curated just for your own reference or any additional files. Now that we've covered the different modules of RightCapital, it's important to know that this was just an overview of each of the different modules. If we click into our main advisor dashboard, you will see a help button in the upper right-hand corner. When we click here, this is going to bring us to our help center. This is where we can view some articles that goes over the data entry process. We also have ones that take deeper dives into each of the modules. So if you have questions about our education module, for example, or just deeper dive discussions you want to have, you can find some of those documents here. But under training videos and webinars, if we click into webinars, you can sign up for upcoming webinars, but also view all of our previously recorded webinars. So if you wanted to focus on a retirement analysis module, for example, and have a deeper discussion about the functionality, the nuances of each of them, this is going to be a great space for you to have a lot of those resources, do some light binge watching of RightCapital content in terms of deeper dive discussions or even case studies on Roth conversions, for example, for any of those topics. On top of having those articles and videos, you also have, under Contact Us Support, the option to reach out to our fantastic support team. The first way you can reach out to them for live support is going to be that chat feature that we would have seen throughout the entire presentation, where you can message the team directly to ask questions. You can also call the helpline directly to get your questions answered or to have that walkthrough of a module. But I highly recommend too, there is the option to book a one-on-one dedicated session. This is a fantastic way to set aside some dedicated time to review something you're entering, a list of questions you have, or just have that second set of eyes on a case that you're working on. But those are all the great resources that you have at the edges of your fingertips.